Fair use. Federal law allows citizens to reproduce, distribute, or exhibit portions of copyrighted motion pictures, videotapes, or video discs under certain circumstances without authorization of the copyright holder. This is called fair use and is allowed for purposes of criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody, which doesn't infringe of copyright under 17 U.S.C. 107.
Oh Yahweh, Kuma, Yahweh, when I put to all your zeata, when I knew some Isane Khabit, arise of you, oh Yahweh. Let your enemies be scattered, and let those that hate thee flee from before thee. Give him thanks by saying Hallelujah.
He adds secures and hooks us tight, a gift from Yah, eternal life. He sent his son a sacrifice to show how much he loves us. You are loved, you are loved. You are loved, you are loved. You are loved, oh, you are loved. You are loved by Yahuwah.
All right, Jamaicans, the Royal Highlanders, Scots and Irish of the Colonies, Jacobite Gleanings. So today I'm going to go into some of the historical books on who, of course, the real Scots were, just mainly focusing on the Jacobite Gleanings, but I want to also look at the accounts of the Scottish Highlanders who indeed were Negro and black and sold into the colonies because they were actually royals, and that is made very clear in the accounts and letters, and also other books that document the Hanover and Windsor takeover of the British throne and dynasty. So let's first get into the hurricane and Jamaica and what's currently going on there, because that's really what spawned this, in addition to me looking at Meghan Markle before. So disclaimer, I'm obviously using AI images.
If I tell you that the recent devastation in parts of Western Jamaica by Hurricane Melissa owes its historical genesis to slavery and the plantation system, would you believe me? Well, spend a few moments with me and I will explain why. In places such as Westmoreland, parts of St. James and St. Elizabeth, a lot of the land, especially in Westmoreland, remained leasehold lands and not freehold, meaning the persons who lease could not have purchased because the purchasers, the owners are not selling, they are in fact leasing them land. Prior to emancipation in 1838, there were no attempts by the ex-colonial masters or the plantation system to redistribute land in places like Westmoreland. So what does the formerly enslaved people do when it comes to land? They had to lease land, and if it is a leasehold property, you cannot build anything permanent on it, meaning you cannot put a concrete structure that cannot be lifted up and carried away. Once it is leased land, it must be a chattel house on that land. meaning a structure that can be lifted up and carried away. And usually this is a board structure. All right, so that's the first thing we need to understand. So the land in Westmoreland were, prior to emancipation, owned by corporations, huge companies which existed in England or on the island, or they were owned by individuals. So these large scale farming which was done in sugar, bananas, or cattle rearing, especially in Westmoreland. So the land was concentrated, right, in the hands of a few large plantation owners. And that has remained up to today in Jamaica. Places such as Appleton Estate, which is located in St. Elizabeth.
So who is it exactly that is owning and leasing this land and owns all of these hotels and commercial structures that get precedence over water and power in Jamaica? Who is it that is running Jamaica and the government?
A select group of families wield significant influence over the island's economy. Today, we delve into the world of Jamaica's most powerful families. Our journey begins with the colonial history that set the stage for their dominance. During the colonial era, immigrants from Europe, the Middle East, and Asia arrived in Jamaica, establishing businesses that would eventually grow into vast empires. These families, often of Jewish, Lebanese, Chinese, and Indian descent, now control substantial portions of Jamaica's economy. Let's explore some of these influential families in detail, starting with their origins, business ventures, and impact on Jamaica's economy. At number 1, the Leachin family. Michael Leachin, a prominent business figure, leads the family's ventures in financial services. He made his fortune investing in NCB and AIC Limited. He is the president and chairman of Portland Holdings, a privately held investment company. His younger brother Wayne Chun is the chairman of Superplus Food Stores. Their investments in these critical sectors demonstrate their broad economic impact. Michael Leachin is listed on the Forbes billionaires list with an estimated net worth of $1.5 billion. At number 2, the Stewart family. The Stewart family is one of Jamaica's wealthiest and most influential families, with significant contributions to the tourism and automotive sectors. Gordon Butch Stewart founded Sandals Resorts International, a luxury resort chain, and the ATL Group, which includes Appliance Traders Limited and an automotive division. His brother, Richard Stewart, established Stewart's Automotive Group, a leading car dealership in Jamaica handling brands like BMW, Mitsubishi, and Jaguar, now managed by Jacqueline Stewart. The combined net worth of the Stewart family is estimated at around $1 billion, with their businesses playing a vital role in Jamaica's economy. Notable figures include Adam Stewart, executive chairman of Sandals Resorts, and Jacqueline Stewart, managing director of Stewart's Automotive Group. At number 3, the Desnos family, renowned for co-founding Desnos and Geddes, D&G, the brewery responsible for Red Stripe beer. The Desnos family has expanded into other beverages and hospitality. Their ventures have made them influential in Jamaica's food and beverage industry. The family has an estimated net worth of $600 million. At number 4, the Geddes family, associated with the Desnos family, the Geddes have made significant contributions to brewing and distribution. The family has an estimated net worth of $600 million. At number 5, the Orain family, leading Grace Kennedy, a diversified conglomerate operating in over 60 countries. the Orine family's reach spans financial services to food manufacturing. Don Webby is the current CEO of Grace Kennedy. With an estimated net worth of over 500 million US dollars, the Matalan family. Of Syrian Jewish descent, their journey began in the mid-20th century with Moses Matalan founding the ICD Group and Wiccan. They spearheaded urban development projects like the Greater Portmore Housing Development, the largest housing development ever in the Caribbean. Today, Joseph Matalan heads the family business. The Matalans control significant assets in construction and real estate, with their companies generating substantial revenues. The Matalan family has an estimated net worth of 350 million US dollars. At number 7, the Mahfoud family. Originally from Lebanon, the Mahfoud family established the Wysinko Group in the 1960s. Known for popular brands like Wada and Biga, Wysinko dominates the beverage market. William Mahfoud currently leads the family business. Wysinko's estimated revenues exceed 40 billion Jamaican dollars annually, highlighting their dominance in the food and beverage sector. The Mahfoud family has an estimated net worth of 300 million US dollars. At number 8, the Issa family. Abraham Elias Issa was a Jamaican businessman, entrepreneur, and hotelier acclaimed as the father of Jamaican tourism. As the first president of the Jamaica Tourist Board, he guided the rise and boom in Jamaican tourism of the late 1950s. His business accomplishments include the founding of Jamaica's first modern department store, Issa's of King Street, the country's first shopping plazas, Tropical Plaza at Halfway Tree and Ligony Plazas, Jamaica's first supermarket, High-Low at Crossroads in Kingston, Jamaica's modern horse racing track, Caymanas Park, and being a guiding force behind the development of New Kingston, now the island's commercial center. He built Tower Isle Hotel, Jamaica's first all-season resort, later evolving it into Couples Hotel. The Issa family net worth is estimated at around 300 million US dollars. Up next, the Ashenheim family. With Jewish roots, the Ashenheim family is a prominent and wealthy family in Jamaica, known for their significant contributions to the business landscape of the island. They own stakes in some of the island's biggest companies. The Ashenheim family has stakes in companies such as Caribbean Cement, Carreras Jamaica Limited, and was also involved with Lascelles de Mercado, which owns J. Ray and Nephew and Appleton Rums. Their estimated net worth of over 300 million US dollars reflects their critical role in the country's economy. At number 10, the Hendrickson family. Of Chinese-Jamaican descent, the Hendrickson family founded the National Baking Company in the 1950s. Today, they are the largest bakery in the Caribbean and own the prestigious Jamaica Pegasus Hotel. Carl Hendrickson currently leads the family business. Their estimated net worth is around 200 million US dollars.
So, our colonial past or our colonial legacy has remained to haunt us into the 21st century. It has remained that way for many, many years, and it is currently happening. A huge amount of the land in Westmoreland. You ask anybody who lived in Westmoreland, who are the landowners? People like the white Jamaicans. I won't call anybody's name, but they remain the owners of land. Places like Clouden by the Sea. If you go there, you see massive hotels. It owned by white Jamaicans, right? And the masses of the people remain on leasehold lands. That has to change and must change, because we are now in the 21st century. Our colonial legacy has plagued us and continue to haunt us even now. And Hurricane Melissa just came and compounded the situation, because it blew away these chattel houses, these board houses, and killed persons in Westmoreland and St. Elizabeth. So it's time Government heed the call of the people. Land reform in Westmoreland and that part of Jamaica, St. Elizabeth, St. James, so that people can have access to land which they can purchase.
And so I've heard various accounts over the course of this Hurricane Melissa of Jamaicans saying that when these disasters happened, oftentimes their older structures, ancient buildings, are cemented in or covered in stone so that the history is hidden, and that this is often done after natural disasters and then more land is taken. But to me, the solution really for the Jamaicans today is for them to get ownership of the land, as well as for these families with all these hotels to house these refugees somewhere in their hotels. The solution is not for them to purchase the land, but for reparations to be made and for them to be given the proper ownership of the land. That's an extension of Africa. That is not Europe. And so this is all coming from colonization. As the times of the Gentiles are over, and these are not the lands of these people, these are not their land lots, except for maybe Isa. But it is time for people to get legitimate ownership over the land. And in terms of them being protected right now, they need to be housed in the hotels that these wealthy families own and fed, of course, by their large food and beverage industry. Now, that's not very likely going to happen, and I'll show you in a minute why, but it should happen because these are the true royals in Jamaica of North Africa, aka Western Europe and Britain, and also because Jamaica is part of the land of Africa and it is the lot of Shem. And let me add for you that the first piece of land to be hit in Westmoreland was called White House. White House. And we know that the Americans were in Jamaica trying to target Venezuela there. And of course, it is the time of the fall of the Gentiles, of Japheth in particular. And China is assisting in that fall.
So, if you're wondering why Jamaica is in the mix and the Caribbean is reacting the way it is now, the main reason is the UK crown is now taken to court because of legitimacy to the throne. With that being said, everyone is like, hey, we're not having that. So now the Caribbean is kind of backing away from the crown because they're realizing it's not legitimate. And not only that, you then have three big nations who want to clash heads in the Caribbean. And this is why they set up the hurricane to happen for all three major countries, China, Russia, and America. Facts. To pull up to one location trying to help. And that will cause a conflict. It's a lot of conflict going on. And just know it's a WAR on the Caribbean right now. It's a WAR on the Caribbean right now. It's your boy 999 Divine.
All right, so you can see this slide has a picture here of Scotland. And this is where the Stuarts, the royal family, King James family, came from. And I actually believe that they were truly the descendants of the Maccabees. And if you don't know, the Hasmonean dynasty was a mix of Israel, Judah, and Edom. And why do I say that? Because the 12 patriarchs tells us really that, and according to the blessing on Joseph, that Joseph would be the last one among, probably including Judah, to be sold into slavery, that he would go on ships and boats as a king. And so I believe the Maccabees were a combination of the scattered northern, or king of the northern kingdom, Joseph, meaning Ephraim, and the scattered southern tribe, primarily, I would say, Judah and Levi. because the tribes tried to remain in the lands of the Kasdim, in the lands of Shem, as long as they possibly could. And that's why they were always in India or in what is so-called Western Europe and Britain, which is part of North Africa, the land of Shem. And so we see the mixture of Edom with Israel and Judah come about through the Hasmonean dynasty and the Maccabees, and also manifest in the Byzantine Empire, which is also mixing in with Japheth. And eventually all of these then become mixed in with the Huns, the Canaanites, and that's through the more corrupt lines of Japheth, like the Gomerians and the Ashkenaz. And so the reason why I want to explore this, obviously, is because of everything going on in Jamaica. And really, the throne has truly been contested since the queen supposedly passed away. And I'm not going to go into all of that. But it was supposed to be before 2019 that she actually left this world. And so who are these people? Well, we have a little bit of information about it from the book called Jacobite Gleanings. And so I've provided this evidence before, but I'm just going to provide you with a little bit more evidence. I had to get a little inspired to do this video. It's going to be a little longer than expected, which I thought it was going to be 15 minutes. So it's probably going to be about 45. So let's get into it. The legitimacy of the British monarchy stems from acts of parliament, primarily the Act of Settlement in 1701, the Act of Union, and the Succession of the Crown Act in 2013. And these laws, and not an anachronistic concept like the divine right of kings, determine the line of succession. So in other words, they got rid of the true indigenous inheritors and monarchy, the Shemites in the land of North Africa, aka Western Europe and Britain, and they decided by an act of parliament that they would determine who would be king. And then it says the name, the House of Windsor, was officially adopted by King George V in 1917 via a royal proclamation to distance the family from its German roots, Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha. Now, Saxe is Isaac's son, and Coburg is also, these are darker people, and Gotha is obviously the Goths, right? Probably the Gomerians. So this happened during World War I, a legally valid act under the British constitutional law. The current royal family is an unbroken line of descent from the House of Hanover monarchs who took the throne in 1714. All right? And so this is how the current family in Britain is ruling, simply through their own parliamentary acts and the monarchical line of the Hanovers, which don't actually have any rights to that land other than that they conquered it and stole it. Now, it's important that you understand, just for some context, that the land of Britain today is part of Hibernia. Hibernia is Eber's land. Please look at my video, my final video on the name of the land of Africa or land of Israel, which goes into all the etymology in the Hebrew and landmarks connecting it. And as well, I also talk about the river Euphrates running between the Black and Caspian Sea all the way across the Atlantic Ocean into the Niagara Falls. And that is the northern border of the land of Abraham. All right, and so anything beyond that is still part of the land of Shem. And Ireland was called Ur of the Chaldees, or Ur of the Kasdim. The Kasdim are the Shemites, all right? And so Ur Kasdim in the Hebrew is commonly translated as Ur of the Chaldeans, a city mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as the birthplace of the Israelite and Ishmaelite patriarch Abraham. All right, Ur, which means flame. It means actual light. More means reflected light. Ur means source of light, and that's who the Shemites were and the Israelites were. Okay, it means a flame. and it means the east. So if you're confused about east and west, Ur or Ireland is in the east. All right, just to be clear in case anyone's confused. And so Brit, of course, means covenant. There was a covenant made with Abraham in Genesis 15:18 between Yahuwah and Abraham. And in the same day, Yahuwah made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto you, thy seed, have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river Euphrates. And of course, that is where the Nile, which is really the Jordan, runs into the Black and Caspian Sea and splits apart to travel west all the way into the Niagara Falls and the Great Lakes in Canada. All right. And so this is the video you should take a look at about the name and the etymology and the Northern Kingdom. All right. And so from that book on Ur of the Chaldees, this book, Ireland, called Ur of the Chaldees by Anna Wilkes. It's not all correct, but it has some excellent information and clues in it. It says, the connection with Ur to an old Bible personage of importance, the grandson of Arphaxad, Eber, or Heber, all right, whose name was given to Ireland, which is to be perceived in the word Hibernia. That Ireland has preserved to the present time more distinct marks of the ancient Ur than can be pointed to in any other country, whether of Asia or Europe. Besides Ireland having once had the name of Hibernia from Heber, these are names derived of Eber in England and Scotland. In Scotland, page 40, the Hebrides. In England, the old name of York, Eboracum. All right, so York means new moon or Iraq. So the Iraqis were actually Gentiles, all right, Japheth, but the old name of York was Eboracum or Hebrew-cum, okay? A stronghold of the Hebrew was Iberia, a name under which Spain was once also known, all right? And this connects, the book also connects Tarshish with this land in error, but it's not Japheth's land. But of course, the ships of Tarshish came from the Caspian Sea, which is Japheth's connection to this northern kingdom of Israel, so-called Western Europe or North Africa, which we call Western Europe and Britain today. So Tarshish was actually Tyre or Tyrke or Turkey is near the Caspian Sea, and that's where the connection was. But this book is erroneous about the connection. All right. And so Genesis 11:28 says, Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, Ur of the Chaldees. So Ireland is Ur of the Chaldees. And in Nehemiah 9:7, we already read this one above, it says, Thou art Yahuwah, the Alua, who did choose Abraham and brought him forth out of Ur of the Chaldees and gavest him the name of Abraham. So once again, it means flame. Ur means flame. All right. And later on, like we said, Eboracum was called Urach or York, meaning new moon or center of moon worship, because the Shemites there became very corrupted. All right. And so this is, I have other videos on Esau Edom, so go ahead and take a look at them. But you're going to see that Esau Edom did settle there in Britain after the fall of Israel, after 70 AD, quite early on, all right? And so once again, I always show you this Assyrian or Akkadian image, and this is Tiglath-Pileser. All right, and this is the Hebrew form of Akkadian Tuklu Apasara, meaning my trust is in the son of Esau. So we know there's an Esau family ruling in Jamaica. And of course, the Dukes of Edom, we're going to see, also took over rulership in Britain. And they had many times for quite a long time, since 70 AD. And then it says, Esau was the main temple dedicated to the god of Ashur in the city of Ashur. And Esau was the king of the Assyrian Empire from 745 BC to his death in 727 BC. And so these were the Edomites who also took the Israelites captive into the Americas. All right, but I want you to see the connection with the Assyrians, who were descendants of Shem as well as Esau, taking over their identity and folding into their identity, and the Chaldeans, the Ur of the Chaldeans, dwelling in northern Europe, northwestern Europe, and the UK, still those being their lands outside of the lands of Israel. And this is where I believe both the northern and southern kingdoms scattered to during the times of them being cast out of the land of Israel. This Ur of the Chaldees, to finalize, is the city of the patriarch Abraham. And this word is still embodied in the word Aberdeen, Heberdeem, okay, Aberdeen, Scotland, Hebrew Den of Scotland. So here is a description of the old black breed in the book Ancient Antiquities in Europe. And it describes what the old Negroes who lived in the area, looking very much like Byzantines. Here's a Byzantine on the right. This is Ivan, the descendant of Ivan the Terrible, right? And then we see up on the right also the Edomite descendant of Charles V, Philip of Spain, right? So we see how they have a pretty particular kind of eyes and eyebrows and face shape. And the last old black breed to be living in Britain and Western Europe, aka the northern kingdom of Shem or Israel, is described as the head is broad and short, the face strongly developed at the cheekbones, frowning or beetle-browed, the development of the brow ridges being especially noticeable in contrast with the smooth, almost feminine softness of the Saxon forehead. All right. And so these are Isaac's sons, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Esau is the descendant of Isaac, not Jacob. And so that is the etymology of the word Saxon. All right. It's coming from Isaac's son. All right. It says another equally good example of this primitive old black British type is shown in our old black breed, the man from Shetland Islands, shown at pages 302 and 303. These people are today nearly extinct in the lands, I am informed by Mr. Beddoe, etc., etc. But this is who they're saying are black, but of course these are Gentiles and they're white. He has blonde hair, so I don't know how he would be described as black, but these guys have dark black hair. And so they're looking more like Melungeons than they are like black people. But even the Edomites were the last to be populating the land. And of course, here is some ancient paintings of Shakespeare and his children. So we see the Gentiles breeding and mixing in with the Israelite or Shemitic lines here. And you can see this from this little boy on the left, that these children have a very similar look, very mixed race. And this is the Shakespearean cookbook. There's a lot of whitewashing. You can see from the quality of this painting that when you head over to this book, it seems to be very doctored because the quality is poor. It looks like it's been whitewashed over and things have been added and like little demons running around and stuff. So you can see there's some doctoring going on. And this, of course, is the Stewart family. Again, a lot of whitewashing occurring with these images. We see some of the French Jacobites here at the top. We see this is supposed to be King James, either here, I believe, or here, and then his wife here. And so they've whitewashed, again, these people, because you can see these frames of black around an afro-looking kind of hair around the edges of the faces. You see what I mean? And then the jaw is extended a bit too long. And, there are many other images of these people looking very similar, but having darker skin that have been preserved. And of course, I want to point out, of course, this tree of life here that they're holding on a platter. A lot of the secret imagery of the true stewards or Tudors is preserved in English cooking books, of which this is one. All right. And of course, Meghan Markle would do very well to source English cooking and these cooking books to smooth the transition that is going to inevitably happen. And of course, my fee will be 10% for that valuable information. 10% of your offering, the tithe, of course, if Meghan Markle chooses to do so, of going back to black regarding the British throne. And so just here's some images of, this is a model, Marianne Noya, and she, of course, is West African. She's an albino, but we see the very clear, similar looks that she would have to the imagined Elizabeth of today. But Elizabeth was probably much darker, which is written of in the accounts. In the book Elizabeth the Queen by Alison Weir, Queen Elizabeth is described as having a swarthy complexion like that of her mother's in this book by Alison Weir. I wanted to show you guys this picture. This is an AI generated image. All right, so don't be fooled by it. It's not a true portrait. A lot of people, it was released on November 6th, and a lot of people are thinking it's a true story. But, you know, as you know, the enemy kind of hides truth in plain sight. And you know, I'm always decoding this stuff because a lot of people are fooled by this. And my job as a watchwoman is to decode what the enemy is doing that is confirming truth, and decode what he is doing confirming lies, so that you guys aren't deceived. This story was called The Dead Do Not Vanish. And notice how this is supposed to be a mother and her two daughters, and there's this whole story the AI tells. But she's got, notice how she's got her fingers in the X, and then the two daughters have their hands in the peace sign on the side, which means, you know, the Hebrews in America will say peace out, right? But that really means a fallen tree, a fallen empire. And she's got the X for the two sticks. And so it's really a picture of the two sticks, the northern and southern kingdom, and the moment of their fall. Okay, and so I don't know why AI is referring to this, probably to point to the true rise of Israel right now. It may be that it's trying to say that the two sticks are, you know, going to fall or be cursed, or that this happened in the past. But, you know, I'm going to say that they're actually coming together to become one now, manifest in this image on the positive. But ultimately I chose this image with the two branches and the tree of life because it's a more accurate depiction of that message. Also, that is what this video is about. The origins of the Black Royals, who were scattered to the four corners, really sent to the colonies in the Americas and the West Indies, and that history. When Israel mixed with Edom was when the Hasmonean ruler John Hyrcanus conquered the Edomites, or Idumeans, and forcibly converted them to Judaism in 125 BCE, including requiring a circumcision and adherence to Jewish laws. And this led to the assimilation of many Edomites into the Jewish population, with King Herod the Great being a noted example of this lineage. And so what you're going to find is that the Dukes of Edom take over during the removal of the Stuarts, who I kind of call the Maccabees because I believe they are related to the Maccabees. And the Maccabees were basically, it was Judah and Levi left over with some of the Edomites mixed in. Some people say it was just the Edomites, but we don't know for sure, but I suspect that it was some mixture thereof. And I call them that because many are Macs, like there's McDonald's, McPherson's, and the McPherson was my family's name in Scotland, and they were located at the center of all the clans in Bade Enoch. And the McPhersons were also scribes who wrote many letters and books on the final end of the Jacobites. And this to me was very interesting because that's what the Levites tend to do, is they tend to be scribes. And they tend to sit in the midst of all the tribes. All right, so that was an interesting discovery. Basically, I'm going to review in a few seconds how Charles tried to take back the Scottish kingdom, and with the aid of these other Maccabees, I call them. And so here is a picture of Scotland during these times. This is Badenoch, the Highlands, where the McPhersons are. Now, the largest family you can see right here are the Campbells. Among these clans and tribes of the Maccabees were the Campbells were the biggest one, and they had over 10,000 men involved. I think the McPhersons had about 600 men involved in the war, but Ewan Clooney McPherson, I believe his name was, I'll confirm it in a minute, was the scribe and the most active in recording this war and having the trust of the king to try and help him execute this conquest. So you see how the McPhersons are in the center of the Highlands. There's some other ones too, the Robertsons. But all these little pink marks are the steward. It says steward, 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 steward. And so that is really the King James family, the Stewards. But I believe the Campbells are Yehuda, because they have the largest tribe and they're in the south. All right? But these are just my theories. Now, the interesting thing about the McPhersons is that the Jacobite Gleanings, which we're going to read from, and this is the book that everyone gets the documentation about how the Hebrews really looked, and when they were sold into slavery and indentured servitude into both the West Indies and America, this is the book that describes what their names were and how they looked. The key to this final Jacobite rebellion were the Macintoshes, who ensured Charles didn't turn himself over to the Dukes. The 10,000 men, like I said, provided by the Campbells, and the McPherson clan, who hid Prince Charles for months after the failed rebellion, and then ensured he was transported safely back to France. So that's what the Campbells and the Macintoshes and the McPhersons did. Really, the Macintoshes and the McPhersons made sure that Charles went safely back to France and basically just died of old age. And it was the head of the McPherson clan who hid for 9 years in Scotland, in the same place he had hidden Charles, I guess. And it was called like the Cage or something. It was this kind of area in the woods where the armies hid out and stuff, and he hid there for about 9 years before he was found by the Dukes of Edom. And then this clan is responsible for most of the documents and letters archived to retell the account of the rebellion. And of course, the McPherson family, as I said, is my family clan. And like I said, my sister is married to a Campbell. So very interesting. Exile, rebellion, and vanquishment. The Jacobite challenge. The Jacobite challenge. So they call it the challenge, not a rebellion, because how can it be a rebellion when your own land is being taken over, okay? So in 1689, James the 7th and 2nd was deposed. There then followed over half a century of attempts to reclaim the throne of Britain for the Stuart dynasty, the Jacobite challenge. So who were the Jacobites? They were supporters of King James the 7th, his son James Francis Edward Stuart, and his grandson Charles Edward Stuart, also known as Bonnie Prince Charlie. The name Jacobite derives from the Latin for James or Jacobus. So these are the descendants of Jacob, right? And notice how today Prince Charles, the fake prince of Hanover, King Charles, calls himself Prince Charles, so that you're confused about the identity. So the Stuarts were one of the oldest dynasties in Europe. They had ruled Scotland since 1371, holding off all challengers. In 1603, they inherited the crowns of England and Ireland when James the Fifth and First ascended the throne following the death of Queen Elizabeth I. Why did the conflict break out? Though the Stuart dynasty had survived civil war, regicide, and exile, in 1688 the lineage was torn into two competing camps, divided by religion. By the late 1680s, many of James the seventh, I believe that's the seventh, I hope I'm getting these Roman numerals right, Protestant subjects opposed his personal Catholicism and legal efforts to expand the rights of Catholics in England and Scotland. Now, I'm not sure what to think about this, because remember, the Edomites were Catholics, and then the Gentiles became known as the Protestants. However, when you talk about the Jacobites, they were known to be Protestants truly practicing Judaism and believing in the Messiah, if they did choose to believe in the Messiah. But no matter what, they were Judaizers, and they were also known as crypto-Jews. So this gets very complicated when trying to figure out who these people are. But what they do is they make the conflict about Catholicism versus Protestantism. But once again, that's an odd thing to say when the Jacobites were known to be Protestants. So just keep that in mind. And so they were considered the Protestants, the true Protestants, coming out of France. So they flipped the narrative and they call them the Catholics. And then they come up with this whole cooked up narrative in Scotland about how the Irish and the Scottish are Catholics and the English were Protestants. So they've really confused the narrative to just really in an effort to hide the true race, the true head first leader of the Israelite nations, who were Negroes and indigenous to that land. The birth of male heir James Francis Edward led to concern about the continuation of a Catholic dynasty. Prominent British politicians called on James VII's older daughter Mary and her husband William of Orange to come over to England. In response to the invasion, James fled London, and he was considered to have relinquished his English throne in 1869. The Scots declared that he had forfeited the Scottish crown too. Protestants Mary and William became the new monarchs of England and Ireland, with the Acts of the Union between England and Scotland in 1707 and the Act of Settlement, which stated that the monarch must be a Protestant, was extended to Scotland, and this brought in the Hanoverian dynasty in 1714. I showed you guys this before in the Meghan Markle video, where I kind of show you, we see the House of Stuart coming over in the 1300s, right? And it has something of a connection to Robert the Bruce, but it comes in through Marjorie of Scotland in the 1300s. And then we have James I, so this should be the Black King James, right? And he doesn't look like that. And then we have, Queen Mary and etc., Queen Elizabeth. All right, and then we have Charles I, Charles II, James VII, and then he has a daughter, Mary, who marries William of Orange, these two Protestants. After they take over, they don't have any kids. And then her sister, Anne, somehow links to King George the First, and this is when the Hanovers take over. All right, and see, the Jacobites are falling off, and they start calling James and King Charles the old pretender and the young pretender, like they're pretending to occupy the throne or pretending they have rights to the throne. Well, they have more rights to the throne than King George the Hanover, the Hun, Canaanite, right? And Japhethite, right? Like these are not Shemitic people, right? So, and here's just pictures. I always show these pictures of these kind of more realistic images of these family lines. So you can see, that these indeed were Black people right? And they're mixing out. They're mixing in with Japheth and the lighter-skinned people. But, yeah. So the Jacobites, these are some of the ones in France here. All right, and there's many pictures of them with King James doing English dining and English cooking. All right. So basically, that the daughter of King James lineage got tricked into marrying William of Orange, and then the throne was taken away from them, and that's how the Hanovers just went in and with no genetic relationship on the male or female side and scooped up the throne and the land and everything. All right. So what actions did the Jacobites take? While most Scots supported William and Mary, others still favored James. James' supporters, the Jacobites, threw themselves behind all his attempts and those of his son and grandson to regain the throne. The Jacobite military risings of 1708, 1715, and 1719 threatened both the Scottish and British state, but failed. The final rising of 1745 to 46 was led by Charles Edward Stuart on behalf of his father. It too failed, and the Jacobite cause quickly became a political irrelevance. Despite this failure, the mythology surrounding the lost Jacobite cause grew and persists today. Well, it's not a mythology. It's real. The Hanover line is a mythology. The Hanover line is a mythology. It's not real. As we read, it's created by the Parliament. Then here's all these fake photos of Prince Charles. Of course, they're not. I just showed you they're black, not white. The final battle for the throne. And one thing I want to say is that the dukes took over that Badenoch area. And so the clan of Macpherson was fighting for that land, had lost that land during the last Macpherson or Stuart rising. Okay? So they were displaced by these dukes of Edom. Okay? So here are some of their names. It says here, it says on page 156 of the book, it mentions Lord George and Lord Ogilvy. Remember John Ogilvy's book on the Americas, right? Any relation, possibly. These are all dukes of Edom, and they were hostile to the Stuarts and the Macs. Okay, like the Macphersons, the MacDonalds, that might call them the Maccabees. I could not be wrong about that, but that's what I suspect it's about, is they are Maccabees. All right, and so here's some of the notes. So the Duke of Cumberland was an adversary, sort of the spelling, of the Stuart dynasty. He was the general who defeated the final Stuart supporting uprising at the Battle of Culloden. Culloden. So it sounds like Cullen. Culloden. So Culloden. Near Inverness. So this is where the battle took place. It was in these specific regions, which effectively ended the Jacobite cause in 1746. And this Duke of Cumberland's victory at the Battle of Culloden decisively defeated the Jacobite army that was led by Charles Stuart, who was seeking to restore his father to the throne. All right, so Macpherson, it appears, as I said, the Macphersons are scribes. And there are several references to the Macphersons in this. I know I'm talking, even though it's the Charles Stuart Rebellion, I'm talking a lot about the Macphersons. But the Macphersons were very pivotal to the battle. They lost their land in the Central Highlands during the battle. And as well, my family from Jamaica are Macphersons. Cluny Macpherson was a key, I think his name's Ewan Cluny Macpherson, figure in the Jacobite Rising of 1745, joining the prince's forces at Perth to raise his clan, providing refuge to Prince Charles in his cage after Culloden, which I guess is also where he hid out for 9 years, and being involved in the retreat after Culloden. His clan was expected to join the prince's forces, but was absent during the Battle of Culloden. So the Battle of Culloden, this battle marked the end of the Jacobite risings, where the government forces from Britain defeated the Jacobite army led by Bonnie Prince Charlie. It was the last major battle fought on the mainland of Britain. The aftermath at Ruthven. The day following the defeat at Culloden, approximately 3,000 surviving Jacobites regrouped at Ruthven Barracks, a fortress they had previously taken. They aimed to continue their fight, but received a message from Prince Charles Edward Stuart instructing that each one of them to seek his own safety in the best way he can. This communication effectively signaled the end of the rising or rebellion, leading the weary Jacobites to set fire to the barracks and scatter, leaving behind the visible ruins of today. So here's where the battle took place. Here's Inverness. Inverness is here. Culloden is here. So this area of Aberdeen was the place that was being contended over. And these are the Ruthven Barracks. This is, from here to here is about 82 miles. This is where the battle was at Culloden. And so everyone got stuck at Inverness and the Ruthven Barracks here, between here and here, and couldn't get here to the battle at Culloden. And of course right here, this area is where the Macpherson land is. Argyll is the Campbell land. And the Macphersons were sent to battle in Perth, and then they were told to run, so across Badenoch, their own land, which was being taken. He led siege to Blair Castle over in Perth, but abandoned the attempt on April 2nd and returned to Inverness. Cluny Macpherson consented to join the prince and left Perth to raise his clan. So he went towards where his clan was. Ewan Macpherson of Cluny, chief of the clan Macpherson, joined the Stuart army with about 600 men, but missed the fateful battle at Culloden as he had been sent to guard the passes in Badenoch. After the defeat of Culloden, government men searched the highlands for members of the Jacobite army. As high-ranking men, Cluny was well known. Cluny's house was burnt to the ground and all his possessions looted, forcing him to scatter his men and seek shelter somewhere safe. So what happened was that Lord George and Cluny Macpherson marched to Perthshire, laid siege to Blair Castle, but abandoned the attempt on the 2nd of April and returned to Inverness. They were told to return to Inverness and guard the passes, Badenoch and Inverness. These various enterprises tended to weaken and scatter the prince's force. Its defective commissariat under Hay of Restrug laid the task of keeping it together one of increasing difficulty. The Highlanders stole away to their glens and returned in many cases too late to fight the last battle at Culloden. One interesting comment I saw here is it says, how soon we had given our little fire ordered us to draw our broadswords, which was readily done, but when we indeed fell to pell-mell with them. But the poor swords suffered much, as there were no less than 14 of them broke on the dragoons' skull caps, which they all had before it seems the better way of doing their business was found out. So they were wearing those metal, remember I said that they call them dragoons because they were those soldiers who never ate. Watch my ancient technology wars video and you're going to see who they were fighting. They were wearing, some people think that they were demons wearing these skull caps. that were just made out of metal, and they would never eat or open them to eat or drink or anything. They would just get people to pour water into them. All right. And so they broke a lot of their swords on them. So it was really a very crushing defeat. I mean, it was clear to everybody it was kind of over, it seems like. In Cluny's account, he says that he returned to Inverness to join the king at Ruthven Barracks, a ruined 18th century fort near King Usi, built to control the Highlands, while Inverness is a major city and known as the capital of the Highlands. They were told to run across Badenoch, their own land, which was being taken, right? So they had to fight through there and then get to the Ruthaven barracks. And then they said that they could have built up a lot of soldiers between here and here over the course of 8 days if they just waited, because their numbers were increasing. But they weren't hearing anything from Charles, and Charles wasn't being properly informed either. So they had 4,000 or 5,000 Highlanders at this Ruthaven barracks, and they were amassing and increasing. So he believes that they could have won it, but the communication, I guess, was bad. So page 57, it says, we were masters of the passes between Ruthven and Inverness. This is a 43-mile distance, which gave us sufficient time to assemble our adherents. The clan of Macpherson and Cluny consisted of 500 very brave men. Besides that, many other Highlanders who had not been able to reach Inverness before the battle. So they didn't get to Culloden area, which is near Aberdeen. They were all stuck in Inverness together. They weren't able to make it to the battle in time. It says many of these other Highlanders joined us at Ruthven, which is that barracks, so that our numbers increased every moment. And I'm thoroughly convinced that in the course of 8 days, we should have had a more powerful army than ever. But the prince was inexorable and immovable in his resolution of abandoning his enterprise and terminating in this inglorious manner an expedition, the rapid progress of which had fixed the attention of all Europe. So he's saying that the prince didn't want to continue with the battle. The aftermath at Ruthven. The day following the defeat at Culloden, approximately 3,000 surviving Jacobites regrouped at Ruthven Barracks, a fortress they had previously taken. They aimed to continue their fight, but received a message from Prince Charles Edward Stuart instructing that each one of them to seek his own safety in the best way he can. This communication effectively signaled the end of the rising. The separation at Ruthven was truly affecting. Everyone bade one another eternal adieu. No one could tell whether the scaffold would not be his fate. Reading directly from the book here. The Highlanders gave vent to their grief in wild howlings and lamentations. The tears flowed down their cheeks when they thought that their country was now at the discretion of the Duke of Cumberland and on the point of now being plundered, whilst they and their children would be reduced to slavery and plunged without resource into a state of remediless distress. The Duke of Cumberland, after his victory, advanced to Inverness and received the surrender of Brigadier Stapleton and his Irish piquets. The punishment of the Highlanders, already dispersing their glens, was ruthlessly prosecuted. So this was the moment when they all kind of realized it was over. And what the prince says was that he didn't know that everyone had gathered at Ruthven. Macpherson and Lochiel and Cameron, they all go to meet His Royal Highness. The king says, I'm sorry, Cluny, you and your regiment were not at Culloden. I did not hear till very late that you were so near to have come up with us that day. So he didn't get the message. he didn't get the message that Cluny and all these guys were amassing at Inverness, and they could have done it. So there's this whole thing about the mystery of Cluny's cage. And it says that the chief of the clan Macpherson hid from the government army for 9 years after the Battle of Culloden. So this is the account of the cage, and this is supposed to be where Cluny also hid. And next it says that he remained for 2 or 3 nights in a specific place, and then he was removed to a very romantic, comical habitation made for him by Cluny at 2 miles further distance into Ben Alder, called the Cage. It was really a curiosity, and it was situated in the face of a very rough, high, rocky mountain called Letternillich, which was still part of Ben Alder, full of great stones and crevices, some scattered wood interspersed. The habitation called the Cage, in the face of that mountain, within a small, thick bush of wood. There were first some rows of trees laid down in order to level a floor for the habitation, and as the place was steep, this raised the lower side to equal the height with the other, and these trees, in a way of jests or planks, were entirely well leveled with earth and gravel. There were betwixt the trees, growing naturally on their own roots, some stakes fixed in the earth, which the trees were interwoven with, ropes made of heath and birch twigs, all on the top of the cage, of being round about a rather oval shape, and the whole thatched and covered over with bogge. This whole fabric hung, as it were, by a large tree, which reclined from one end all along the roof of the other, gave it the name of the Cage. And by chance there happened to be 2 stones at a small distance from the other in the side next the precipice, resembling the pillars of a bosom chimney, and here the fire was placed. The smoke had its vent out here, all along a very stony plat of the rock, which had the smoke were altogether so much of a color that anyone could make no difference in the clearest day, the smoke and stones by through which it passed being of so true real resemblance. The cage was no larger than to contain 6 or 7 persons, 4 of which number were frequently employed in playing at cards, one idle, looking on, one becking, and the other firing bread and cooking. Here his Royal Highness remained till he was acquainted with the shipping for receiving and transporting him to France was arrived. So basically it sounds like what is really ironic is that I've imagined building something like it in the wilderness myself, like up against a rock. So it was really interesting to read this account. Some kind of a face of a rock that was covered over by a tree and a whole bunch of branches, and it was covered over with, I don't know, I guess a bunch of shrubbery too, and it was they called it the Cage because you could hide in it. It says that there were stones in the area that were basically the same color as smoke, so you couldn't tell the difference between the stones and any smoke coming out of the chimney. All right. And 6 or 7 people could sit in there, and some of them would be on the lookout. Some of them would be, cooking food. And this is where His Royal Highness remained till he was acquainted that the shipping for receiving and transporting him to France was arrived. And so this is, I guess some story, famous story. That's also supposed to be where Macpherson hid after the prince was returned to France. Then French ships are waiting for him at Loch Naha. He goes on board the Happy ship on the 20th September, escaping all the government's warships and being in her way happily favored. by a fog. And so then he arrives safely in France. And then at the castle of Saint Antoine, they prepared a big reception for him. And the King of France, Louis XV, immediately quitting the council, which was sitting in on affairs at the moment, went to receive him when he came in. And as he advanced, he took him in his arms with every mark of tender affection. This is the fort that they stayed at Ruthven Barracks, and they burnt it out. They burnt it down. Doesn't sound like he was too enthusiastic about the conquest. And I think Prince Charles wound up they ended their days in Rome, in Italy, in the south, having lost their kingdom. And everybody went off into slavery. So whenever they're talking about these Scottish people, these indentured servants, they are not talking about white people. These are the black Scots and Irish that they're talking about. So the Jacobite Rising, notice how they say Grand Rising today. So the Jacobite Rebellion, also known as the Grand Rising, is a significant event in Scottish history that occurred in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. And Jacobite refers to supporters of the exiled Stuart monarchy again, specifically James II and his descendants who aimed to reclaim the British throne. The rebellion saw two major uprisings, failed to restore the monarchy. And this really shaped Scottish history. All right. So when they came up with these things like Acts of the Union, it was just a way to push the Israelites out. And so the Jacobites were primarily composed of Highland clans who saw the Stuart monarchy as a symbol of Scottish identity and autonomy. However, the movement also had support among lowland landowners and Scottish Episcopalian community who opposed the increasing power of the English-backed Presbyterian establishment. Notice how it's Presbyterian. Like Prester John, Presbyterian, Tyrian, Presbyterian, Prester by Tyrian. Okay? Establishment. And so you see what I mean? They're conflating Presterism, Presbyterianism, Prester John's way, with Protestantism, when in fact the Jacobites were the Protestants. They were protesting the false Catholic religion, which the Edomites, the Catholics, the Black Popes, and Prester John, which they were professing, propagating, and imposing on everyone. The aftermath of the rising and the scattering into slavery. The Jacobite Rising of 1745, led by Charles Stuart, also known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, the Young Pretender. They call him that because he aimed to reclaim the British throne for the Stuart dynasty. And it began in August 1745 when Stuart landed on the island of Eriskay and rallied support from the Highland clans. He quickly gained control of much of Scotland, including Edinburgh. So that's over on the northwest side of Scotland. And even marched into England as far as Derby. However, lack of support from key lowland areas as well as a lack of support from France ultimately led to the defeat of the Jacobite army. The rebellion was met with resistance from government forces led by the Duke of Cumberland. So you see it's dukes, the Dukes of Edom. That's literally how the Bible describes the Edomites, as the Dukes of Edom. Right? The two sides clashed in several engagements, including the Battle of Preston Pans, where the Jacobites won a decisive victory, and the Battle of Culloden, which was the last battle fought on British soil and resulted in the defeat of the Jacobite army. It was after this battle that they started selling everybody into slavery, all right, indentured servitude. And so that's why we're going to look at Jacobite Gleanings. And so, like I said, these are the lowlands down here. These are the lowlands down at the bottom. All right. And the highlands are up on this side. It kind of looks like, it's kind of like Jamaica. It looks like the head of a turtle. This is the same as the southeastern land of Jamaica. It looks very similar to this. But so yeah, these are what's called the highlands. And the highest lands are the McPherson lands. So in Jacobite Gleanings, it talks about the deportation of Scottish, Moorish royals to North America and the West Indies. I just want to be very clear. These were not just Scots people. They were all considered royals. So what it says is that, they sent them into indentured servitude as military people, but also servants. All right. And their poor peasantry followed their chief to the field from necessity rather than choice. All right. So remember, the chiefs are the leads over the tribes and clans, right, in Israel. And so, the poorer people are going to follow the royalty. The abolition of heritable jurisdictions, disarming, etc., of Highlanders. Escapes in 1716, offers to transport rebels abroad. So in other words, they're removing them from their own land. All right. And they're calling it transportation. And of course, many of them were military, and they became the Haitian soldiers who conquered much of the West Indies, in addition to those Haitian soldiers who conquered Georgia and the southern states. Now it says what they would do is these people would have to draw a lot. And for those fortunate enough to draw the blank lot, they had to petition for pardon. So this is after the war was lost, which they received on a condition of transportation to our colonies in America, there to serve and remain during the term of their natural lives. All right. On the same conditions as laid down in 1715. As the lot fell on one man of the rank and file out of 20, it follows that 19/20ths of the whole were marked out for transportation, the sickly and the infirm being, of course, excepted from the number. Transportation is said to have first been invented by the Privy Council in the reign of Charles II, and it became an acknowledged form of punishment under the Act of 1701, which defines transportation as a proper legal sentence. So that's being exiled. Remember, the scripture is always talking about exile, them exiling Israel out of their lands. In this case, they're calling it transportation. In the reign of Charles II, the times were such that rebellions were rife and the government could hardly put every rebel to death. Principle and policy alike forbade that. The authorities were as powerless in this respect as Nero, who wished that all Rome had but one head that he might cut it off in a single blow. Sir George Mackenzie, in his vindication of Charles II's government, says, as to sending the people away to the plantations, none were sent away but such as were taken at Bothwell Bridge or in Argyll's rebellion. So when it talks about Argyll's rebellion, those are the Campbells. The land of Argyle is the land of the Campbells. So when you see that teal blue tartan that people wear, that's the Campbell tartan. All right. And so they were deported to the United States. And there's a lot of African-American Campbells in the United States. So those who were taken at Bothwell Bridge or in Argyll's rebellion, and the turning capital punishment into exile was an act of clemency, not cruelty. No, they wanted slaves. Cromwell deported his royalist prisoners. So I want you to be very clear about this. They were royals. All right? They were lords, they were kings, they were princes. Cromwell deported his royalist prisoners so that it was not confined to one section of the community more than another, As to the clemency of transportation, aka exile, Burton talks of how the 700 rebel prisoners taken at Preston and sold as slaves to the West Indian merchants in 1716. So some of them were going to America as slaves, a lot of the Campbells, okay, and others were going to the West Indies, which is where a lot of the McPhersons and McDonalds ended up, all right? He says it is painful to see on the list the many Highland names followed by laborer. So Highland, these are royals. And their names on the slave logs we're going to see are followed by laborer, but they are actually royalty. So Scottish royalty taken to Canada and Nova Scotia, and indentured servants. Okay, right? I'm just going to skip down here because remember, they're doing their whole colonization and conquest of territories, and the English are racing to supplant or at least outnumber the French in the conquered American territories, including the West Indies. The two main military objectives at this time were Canada and India, both west and east, but principally east. The transportation of criminals acted also as a great feeder of colonization. So the transportation, transatlantic slave trade, or exile of the people from their land, acted as a great feeder for colonization. Two chapmen for fraudulent bankruptcy at Glasgow in July 1748 were altered to be pillared and to be transported to America for 7 years. So 7 years is the duration of indentured servitude, and that lines up with Torah. That's as long as you can enslave one of your relatives for, all right, in the Bible, one of your kinsmen. Some of them were criminals, some of them were rebels, ex-royalty, etc. But point being, they were sent out of Glasgow. So Glasgow is the land really of the stewards. And that is where this royalty was sent from and sent into indentured servitude and slavery to the New World. On March 1749, it was announced that responsive to a notice in the Gazette inserted by the Lords Commissioners, upwards of 400 persons had given their names to this estate and plantations office, Whitehall, to go to Nova Scotia. So these people were escaping their persecution. This is when they talk about how they left Europe to escape the persecution of these true Judaizers, right? And so they did sign up to go to Nova Scotia, and that's why the first race riot ever was there, because Nova Scotia was New Scotland, because the Scottish were moved there. All right, the original Black Scots were moved there. All right, so they were sent to Nova Scotia to take the volunteer colonists abroad. More than 50 transports were contracted for by government, which would probably mean 10,000 immigrants at 200 persons for each transport. So that's each indentured servant or slave ship. All right. And also they sent them abroad as soldiers. Many old soldiers would not hesitate to go abroad, says in October 1748. So this is kind of when the merchant marine was being born, right? An allusion to gale birds and the impecunious betaking themselves to the backwoods of Canada. A poet thus expressed the situation. See distant climates they explore, a rude uncultivated shore, transported by harsh decree from gauls and penury they flee. So that's the Gauls. And penitentiary they flee. The transportation of rebels continued till the close of 1748 and a portion of 1749 with the expulsion of the Pretender from France, where all his hopes lay. In December 1748, the English government could afford to exercise more clemency towards political offenders, although it is to be noted that Dr. Cameron suffered as late as 1753 and that the authorities were even later on the qui vive for another insurrection, as may be seen from the extracts from Lord Justice Clerk's letters. Okay, I'm not going to read. So apparently he was expelled from France after that. Okay. Charles was expelled from France. On the 2nd of March, 1756, so on the 2nd of March, 1756, they were still trying to plan to invade the Highlands, all right? And now at this point, they're enemies of the French king. But, so let's get to these slave logs. A description follows of the 150 rebels which Mr. Smith took at Lincoln, York, and Lancaster prisons in October 1746. The name, age, profession, country, and stature of each, with remarks were given in every case. Of the 150, 15 were women. 3 of those Camerons. So, sounds like Cameron, but that's another version of Cameroons. Okay, because these are Moors. Moors are maroons, Cameroons, from Lochbar. So that's again near Edinburgh. That's near the land of the Macphersons. Number 145 was Barbara Connell, 19, Perthshire. Yeah, so Perth is near Boden Enoch. And she was thus described: red hair, clever. Margaret Dykes, 22, no occupation. Lithgow is singled out for distinction of being well looking. Number 57, Isabel Hamilton, 50, comes from Musselborough. Fortunately, all of them could sew, spin, and knit, useful qualifications for female colonists. The exact description of 150 rebel prisoners shipped at Liverpool on board veteran John Ricky Master for the Leeward Islands, which were taken near Antiga on the 28th of June last by Diamond Privateer Paul Marcel, commander, and carried to Martinico the 30th of June, 1747. So you see they're going to Antigua. Okay, so this is the transatlantic slave trade. All right, and so here we see a lot of these names, but again, I always read these names. There were 2 sets of Macphersons. Some of them were from the Chata clan, which is the Chata tribe, and then others were not. Some of them were white or pale, and some of them were very dark. So interesting. So I've read through many of these before, but a lot of them it says... See, it says Dougal Campbell, servant, Argyle, brown-skinned. All right. This is why they're saying these are royals. They're not servants, right? Alex Campbell, laborer, Inverness. John Campbell, Argyle, and it says swarthy. Alex Cameron, Inverness, well-made. So I think the D stands for ditto. So these are all brown, well-made. All right, now here's again, Wells, Dickens, Weaver, Lancashire, red hair, thick-set, healthy. See, notice there's a difference here. Alex Davidson, herdsman, Badendock, ruddy, slim-made. So remember, ruddy is kind of that copper maroon color. Andrew Edwards, servant from the county of Angus, right? Black Angus, right? Black Angus cows. Black, well-made, strong. All right, so it goes on and on, but here's the Macphersons. Duncan Macpherson, Again, it's laborer from Inverness, thin, pale, and sickly. Angus McIntosh, black, very strong. I don't know what that last word is. James M. McPherson from Aberdeen. So that's over again on the north side of Scotland. Black. Oh, wait a minute. Do I have it right here? Sorry. Black, lusty, and well made. I always read that one. It just sounds so funny to me. I don't know what that means. John MacLeod, Inverness, black hair, pale and slender. Alex MacLeod, just reading random ones here. Brown, strong. Stairs. I don't know what that means. But anyway, you guys get the picture. So many of these are black, red hair and strong. Now that doesn't mean, you know, Malcolm X was called red-haired, right? So we know a lot of red-haired black people. It doesn't mean they're white people with red hair. All right, and when it says pale, that could mean somebody who's light-skinned like me, right? Like me, how I look in the winter. All right, but notice all these brown, black, swarthy. Okay, brown, black, pale-faced. So pale doesn't necessarily mean white. Like I said, it can just mean fair. This one says fair complexion, healthy. Dark complexion, black hair. So the point of all of this is to understand and see this is John Stuart, laborer. This is what he said. The royals were called laborers, right? Point being, though, that these are all Negroes. And so these are the ones shipped from Carlisle. Again, we have names like Morgan. Again, we have another McPherson. I was just looking for those. McLean, another Duncan McPherson, another Stewart here. Okay. Cameron, Campbell. I think the Gordon family was very significant also. Because I know that there were a lot of Gordons where I grew up in Edmonton who were from Jamaica. And we were close to their families too. And so I wanted to show you this last Jacobite Rising book in 1745. It was printed in 1901 and I guess edited by Charles Sanford Thierry, okay, master's student. All right, so it's a bibliography of Jacobite history. And so a lot of these documents are coming from the McPherson family. And this has been a really interesting journey for me reading through. These are all the books. I think there's about 5 of them here that are written by the McPherson clan. And all of them are on the history of this succession. All right. And so this to me was very interesting. So this is my family's lineage, is to record these kinds of histories and to write these kinds of books. One book in particular by McPherson James, The History of Great Britain from the Restoration to the Ascension of the House of Hanover, based on the author's original papers and Stuart papers. So this is documenting how the Windsors stole the line, became Hanover, and then became Windsor. And so this is why I warn you about these things and I expose these things, because this is, you know, it's not about like, oh, me, I'm so great and I get to do this, because listen, I go through a lot, but it's a heritage. It's something my family has done historically. So it's like I'm doing it. And so, of course, this is who's claiming to be the McPherson clan today. But if you notice, the sign for the McPherson clan is a cat, but it says not the cat, but a glove. Not a cat, not the cat, but a glove. And so when we go ahead and we look at the celebration that they have been doing here for centuries in the Scottish Highland, what is called their Moorish blackface clog dance. For centuries, they've been doing this dance. We see a people whose faces are covered with black face makeup, or really a glove. So they're disguising the fact, or really revealing it, that they are not the true original Black Scots or Black Irish. They're just masquerading in blackface. And so we can see that probably this is how the McPhersons segued into this white McPherson line. And of course, we know that it was the 16 and 1700s that the Englishman, the angelish man, the descendants of the fallen angels, the Gomerians, began to take on the last names of the indigenous people. So I'm just going to read some highlights from this article. All about how they're just playing in your face. Okay, so this is from mandela8.org UK. So there's a Padstow festival in Cornwall, and they have these blackface dances regularly, and they don't think that these dances are racist, and they're hidden behind tradition. And it's a 100-year-old tradition that goes back to 1921. And it's also tied to the Lancashire blackface tradition of the English Moorish dancing. And then they try to say it's tied to coal mining. But anyway, they used to call this they used to say that coconuts and blackface were a peculiarity of the Rosendale and Whitworth district in the 19th century. And those districts press articles in the 1800s refer to blackface dancers as niggers, ignorance and bigotry at its finest. And in 1854, the press relates that these are the best nigger dances we have seen, and arrayed in nigger costumes. And so they were rated on those dances. And the songs they sang were "Oh, Susanna," and "There Was a Little Nigger." Playing in your face. Now, it is a historical fact that the European invaders into Western Europe and Britain began to take on last names, and they actually took on the last names of the people in the lands they colonized. And so some of the history may just be taken from the treasure chests and information left behind by the Hebrews taken into captivity. So I can't say for sure that it's 100% my descendants or that it hasn't been doctored, but at least it's interesting that there is traces of the McPhersons being the ones who document. And of course, also because I'm a Williams on my Gentile side, I'm related to William of Orange. So I could very well be related to both sets of McPhersons. All right, and so these are all the tartans of the African tribes, because of course people were transported out of the lands of the Castim and the Northern Kingdom back into Africa, again, as we clearly hear from the Inquisition and transatlantic or transportation slave trade, indentured to extreme chattel slave trade. So that's just the clear evidence of, where these families have gone. And, please pray for Jamaica, everybody, and, send money, supplies through family. In conclusion, I just want to say the evidence here is irrefutable that the Scots were originally black, as were the Brits, and the Irish, Ur of the Chaldeans, once again, was the land. And this was part of the larger lot of Shem, which is a humongous land lot. And so pray for your royal brothers and sisters in the West Indies and in America, is scattered to the Four Corners family. And just if you're from these lineages, I hope this helps you to track who you are. And as for the Gentiles grafted in, remain in Yahushua HaMashiach, and you will be part of the family of Yah. And of course, as for Yahsharel and all of these Negro British scattered to the four corners, Africa, the West Indies, and even America, seek Yah. Now, I want to say some of these families may be Kasdim, some of these families may be Edomites, Assyrians, other tribes of Shem, but I do believe that these are majority, the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's my theory. But what we do know for sure is the indigenous people of Western Europe, really North Africa and the UK, are in fact Negro Shemites. That is made very clear from these extensive slave logs and the descriptions of the Black Scots, as well as, go ahead and look at my Stolen Identities playlist, and I cite a lot of books describing the Scottish and the true Kasdim, the true British of those lands. So go ahead and take a look at those. I think the evidence is irrefutable at this point. I do believe that these European families own reparations, especially Esau and the Stuarts, those masquerading as them, and of course, all the other Gentile tribes controlling Africa. But we know that's not going to happen. We know that China is taking everything over. Apparently, they own all of these gigantic hotels they're building in Montego Bay, because that is going to be the airport to Africa, as I said before. And so before this eye of the storm hit the White House of the West Coast, in other words, down with Japheth, up with Esau and the Chinese, right? Before it hit, they were already buying up land. Corporate representatives were already buying up land all across Jamaica, so they can prosper in the rise of Africa. The Jamaicans, the West Indians, have already been petitioning the British government for reparations. But let me know if these families should be forced to pay reparations, or at the very least, if they have any kind of a, compassion for the people, that they should be made to house them in the hotels and donate back some of the land for the survival of Jamaicans. Let me know your thoughts on that. I think the answer is pretty obvious, but definitely when you think of Jamaica, you should no longer think of it as controlled by the African diaspora there. I talked to a lot of West Indians and of course white people, and they're all like, oh, they've just made a mess of that country. It's these families that have made a mess of the country, and it's intentional, so that the Jamaicans do not rise up. And so pray for your brothers and sisters and our families. And so we are grateful that the fall of Israel and the curse is over. And please continue to pray for the grand rising of Jamaicans, just like the true Jacobite rising, that the two sticks will come together to become one kingdom of priests. May Yah bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine on you. May he be gracious, lift the light of his countenance, and give you shalom. Be sure to go to intoalltruth.net to pick up the Moedim Appointed Times calendar, as well as Chaya, Eat, Life, and Fast, the Hebraic Lifestyle and Cookbook. It's also a health book to help you with your natural health, the Hebraic way, according to the ways taught to Noah.
Arise of you, O Yahweh. Let your enemies be scattered, and let those that hate thee flee from before thee. Give him thanks by saying hallelujah.